today we're going to talk about addendums. Hopefully you've been to the psychosocial with Aneshka. If not, we'll get there. But addendums, some of the questions that came down from the Take 5 were what's required, what's not required. So we're going to go over that. We're going to talk about best practice and mindfulness while we are actually involved in looking at the psychosocial. When and which addendum might be required if we're using best practice and what is actually required. And how to use a pre and post test for screening, because addendums can be used for that. Okay? On the back of the handout I'm giving you is a real quick, easy brief as to what addendums are required. Initially, the family dynamics is. So you have to decide, is this a child or adult? If you have somebody over 18, obviously they're going to be doing the adult. So if you have somebody if you're turning 18, you would do the adult. That's my understanding from our policy.
Yeah, I know we have had people at Challenger that were over 18, and because of the family situation and because they're still living as a child, that.
So is that more
Developmental, emotional.
Well,
It just has to do with the questions, you know, and the way the questions are asked for an adult one versus the other.
So if we have a client, we're not doing a psychosocial for going like the casino and then they turn 18, do we have to automatically do
when you do the annual psychosocial, not when you're doing that treatment plan review. It's not required. Unless you feel that there's something in that that might be important to you, then you can. It's not saying you can't, but usually it will be required in the annual psychosocial, and you'll have an actual, it'll ask you what addendums have been completed in the past, and then what new ones are you going to be issuing now. So that might be a place to put it. Okay?
So, can you clarify that again? So if you have, because that's one of my questions. If I, and I do this, so if I have an annual psychosocial I'm doing on a client, do I have to do the child the child addendum again, even if nothing has changed?
No, unless they have turned 18 and you wanted to do.
Okay, but my elementary, in my case, it doesn't change because they're not 18. But
Not unless you see something significant.
right, but if
Maybe
there's a
to be added.
significant something different, then I would do another addendum.
And if you remember the body of it, because there's a lot involved about family dynamics and how those particular issues are affecting either client or family members, parents. And then it also has the different aspects of financial, legal, and so if you see that there's things there that really, and this is where best practice comes into effect, and being mindful of where the client is and how to utilize this to help you assess what's going on. Because eventually that could then reframe your treatment plan, the diagnosis first and then the treatment plan. So, you know, it's not set in stone. It's definitely liquidy, as just said. Fluid.
And that's fine, but as long as I know for a child that I've done last year,
Right.
and that, and I have this all the time, parent terminates in April for some reason, and then they restart in October, September, October. I don't have to do a new, I'm doing a new annual treatment plan, but I'm not doing a new child addendum, you know, the child, what is it called?
Child addendum.
Yeah.
Yes, that's, it's family dynamics, child addendum.
Okay, and I'm not doing that unless there's something new or different to add.
Well, it's open and closed, Melinda,
Mhm.
where you have an actual discharge.
You think you should?
All opening paperwork is all brand new.
Okay, so in that case, I have to. But if it wasn't closed and I saw the child through the summer, and then I could, okay.
Yeah.
I got it.
You have to really kind of frame that. Yeah.
It gets a little confusing
I
with these
know,
school
I know.
kids because they go in and out.
And it would, yes, you're right. Okay, so policy, Tykes Teens policy states for psychosocial addendums to ensure that a thorough assessment is completed in targeted areas to assess strengths and barriers to issues identified during the treatment planning process. Does anyone have any questions on that? Of what that might mean? It's pretty broad. And it was targeted areas is what we're looking at. So when we look at the psychosocial, there's different places that we get some of this information. And you're thinking about that as you're doing the psychosocial with the client, is how can this relate? So the second two, the purpose of the actual psychosocial addendums is these assessments will allow the clinician more clarification to better assess, diagnose, and develop treatment strategies. So basically your addendums become a tool. They really do. And if you really read it, the addendums through, using it as a tool to do your clinical summary can really help you there. It kind of flows that way. For instance, if you have an anxiety addendum and they're saying that they have some sleep issues, which this is a question on the test, that the chief complaint is nightmares, stomach aches, and difficulty sleeping, you're going to find that on that anxiety addendum. And down at the bottom it says, how long has this happened for? When did it begin? And what are you doing to help manage that? And that's one of the, I think it's question 12 or 13 on the anxiety addendum, and that can be used in your clinical summary. So even though it is not a required addendum, and yes, it's more paperwork, and yes, it's something else you fill out, it's actually a wonderful tool when you're actually doing your summary and then figuring out the diagnosis might be for this client, what is the best thing to do. So in a best practice sense, this is what might help you. Pretty much is what this means. Okay, as a measurement tool. Now this is the interesting part. An addendum, aside from the required ones, which is your family dynamics, if you target trauma, abuse, neglect, or exploitation, that is definitely a required addendum within the first 30 days. Okay? That has to be done to help mold into that treatment plan. What will be done before the treatment plan. The other one is substance abuse. So if you say yes to either of those two, it's a required addendum. None of the other ones are required. Okay? Again, best practice says if you look at it and you read over the questions, they can be really beneficial.
So Sandy, say for example, I'm working with an adult mother who has a family or history of substance use. Then we do a substance use addendum, even though she doesn't have substance use.
Family history?
Yeah,
It's not hers.
No, it's not her.
No,
It's just
you
a
don't need to.
maternal,
You
paternal.
don't need, no. The substance abuse
Is if it's within her as an adult, like
Yes.
what's happening with her.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, but in children, you would do it if there's a parent in substance use, right?
No.
Oh, no, it's with the child itself?
It's the individual client.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
It's directed at that. Okay. Now, and so far as using addendums, again, as a screening tool, this is part of it, and this would be done before you would do your treatment plan. Using it as a pre or post test, an example would be the behavioral addendum. There are questions on that behavioral addendum. Of course, when a child comes in, the chief complaint is behaviors, temper tantrums, so on and so forth. That is an addendum that you really do want to look at, because it really strongly provides evidence as to where the client or the parent's perception is of this, and then some of the parent's strategies. So these give you areas to work with when you're actually doing your treatment plan. It gives you your objectives right there. You don't have to go very far with it, because your parents are already telling you what's going on. And they have the scaling, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it is an absolutely wonderful tool. If you do that the first month, and again, you don't have to do it with the psychosocial and the treatment plan to be completed, but if you do it, say, within the first 1 or 2 months, and then you do it again a month later, you start to see improvement. Then at the end of your 6 months of your treatment plan, you do it again, and all of a sudden you see the scores going up. Well, here's a really good tool to know kind of where the parents are judging things and what has been working, because the strategies are down below.
So you're saying that, and this is not something I've ever thought of, that you really can use these on the behavioral thing,
Absolutely.
or even on the other scales for objectives.
Absolutely.
So I like break my neck thinking, how can I frame this
Mhm, mhm.
to make it an objective? I really just have to look at the addendums and come up with something.
And if you look at the paper addendums, and I'm sorry it's not in yours, but if you look at the paper addendums at the very bottom, for instance, of anxiety and depression, they really mold into some of the diagnoses that you can actually be looking at.
Yeah.
And they're wonderful to use as a tool, again, especially if you get, foggy brain does anybody have any questions yet, so far on any of that? Okay. So how many addendums do we actually have? 8. Yeah. It feels like a lot, but when you look at it, it's not. Because 2 of them are family dynamics. So that, right away, that just absolutely has to mold in with that psychosocial. If you don't have a family or child or adult-child dynamic that's completed in LORS, by the time your psychosocial is signed, that's going to be a bump. Somebody's going to say, peer review is going to say, this is not complete. Because there's a lot of information there. So substance abuse or trauma abuse, again, you may not have those as being something you need to even look at. So then you're back to depression. Okay, there's 2 different ones, depending if it's an adolescent, adult, or a child. Age of adolescence. Well, that's going to be what you and the parents might perceive that child. So challenger kids, they may still need to use the child addendum. Adolescence doesn't necessarily mean they're 13. So you can kind of look at that factor as well. So you have anxiety behavior, bereavement, depression, bereavement and grief. Now, when you look at the policy looks at that it's somewhat of an immediate grief to the individual. It's not that, well, it was a second, third cousin or great-great-grandparent they never met, or yes, certainly that's a family issue, but could be a family issue, but doesn't really affect them. So you really want to look at something that affects them. Is it a peer that had a problem at school and maybe there was a suicide? That may be a time to look at a grief, bereavement and grief, depending on how it affects that child. Again, you can use it as a tool because some of the questions on there are very specific to the individual as to how they feel about things and if they've processed the grief. It's also a little older. I think you would have some difficulty talking about some of these questions but you can probably bring it down to the age and make it more developmentally appropriate. And then just use it as make a summary of it in the progress note that that's going to be. So really, we really only have a few when we look at it, addendums that are really basic. So what I'd like to do now, instead of me talking about the addendums, is I would like a volunteer to tell me what they know about a depression addendum and how they've used it.
I actually don't use them a lot, but when I do, they're very helpful. So I wish I used to, I probably will use them more often than that we spoke about it.
Okay. But what about, does anybody have any ideas what the depression addendum might say?
Well, I used to the other day, so I
Should
should.
remember. It says how, well, I can't even think of it. I know anxiety a little bit, but,
I think there are sleep questions on there,
that's the.
but that was,
It talks about the symptoms.
Yes, like how long have you been experiencing certain symptoms? Well, for me,
Loss of interest.
how would your life be
Appetite,
better
sleep.
yes.
if you did not have
Good.
this?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
It
that's
does
my
say-
favorite.
Yeah.
That's the one I find most helpful actually in the whole thing.
Some of the
Other
other
stuff is
stuff, what
covered
other
in the
coping,
psychosocial.
or how does this help you, I think it's, like, how
How
is
does your
this,
depression help you?
yeah, like, how is this working for you, or like, it has a very thing where, like, how, like, it's a funny worded one word, and then people actually answer it, like, well,
What would you be doing different if you felt better?
yes,
Is
that one,
is
and
the
then there's
actual question.
another one that says,
Is there something
how does it help you?
secondary gains?
How does it help, it becomes a lot,
Yeah,
like,
it's not
secondary
phase, but
gain,
it's not-
exactly. People feel sorry.
That's
There's a
what I-
secondary gain question in
That's
there,
good.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Isn't it, Andy? I think. Like, how has it been?
How do these symptoms impact your life is one of them.
Maybe it's in the adult.
This
Maybe
is
it's
the
in-
adult that we.
Oh.
I used the depression and the anxiety the other day, hoping to tease out whether I was gonna diagnose this child with depression or anxiety, and I ended up having to do both. I'm like, dang.
And again, see, that's where the diagnosis piece comes in, when you look at because they were actually modeled after the different symptoms from the DSM. Okay, and that's where the questions come from. So if you look at the depression addendum, the very first one, sadness, irritability, low self-esteem, changes in appetite, so on and so forth, you're looking at possibly dysthymia, you're looking at possibly, major depression disorder. The second one, keyed up, is a key word in there. Extreme anger, happiness, excessive energy, racing thoughts. And you might be looking at some kind of a manic, mood, okay? And so you really, and down at the bottom, again, like I said, it does have note to therapist about how the DSM is outlined in some of the different diagnoses. And then qualifiers, above diagnosis cannot be made in the presence of bereavement, schizoaffective, schizophrenia, delusional disorder, psychotic disorder. So there are some good paragraphs down at the bottom as well. But anyway, thank you for answering that. I appreciate it. How about anxiety? Does anybody have anything on anxiety where you've used it and
Yes.
have felt it was effective?
You know, the
Yeah.
sleepless questions and
Mhm.
preoccupation, how often do you think of something, you
Okay,
know?
yeah.
I have
Use
used
the
the
anxiety
anxiety one, more than the
I
depression
have
one.
using obsessive thoughts,
The
compulsions.
obsessive, yes.
Like you have, hair pull. Yes, yeah, I'm gonna get on that.
What do we get, stars?
That's very
Oh.
cute.
Conscious discipline.
Okay, there you go. Okay. The very first question is one that we use often when we have kids that come in that are little. And what are they doing with mom? And so what, like,
Separation.
oh, very good, awesome. So there you go, there's that measurable tool for you. And if you look at that and you see the mom talking about that, is it on the psychosocial as a chief complaint? Is it on the symptom checklist? All these pieces go together and they flow. So it can really be validating, not only for your diagnosis, but also how you're providing the treatment plan and how you're looking at the different goals and objectives. If you want to use any of these as a tool in your objective, you can.
So instead of looking at it as I've done, and I suspect many others have done, is like something nearly, another
Let me
form
call you back when I get
to
it.
fill out, we really should be looking at it as a tool to help us.
Absolutely, yes.
And just
It
because
is a tool to help you. Exactly.
And just because we've done it as an addendum doesn't necessarily mean that we have to make it a problem statement. Can we use it as a tool since it's not mandatory?
Yes, exactly, that's the point behind it.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the point behind it. What I'm saying is you don't have to use it as it can be a tool for you.
Because it asks like about more specifics like nightmares, that kind of stuff. Or at the psychosocial, I think you just kind of.
Yeah, see,
Like,
I
How many?
I do problems with sleep, problems falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, nightmare. So I do. So there's a little redundancy for me, but it's just because I do sleep a lot. Maybe because I work with ladies who always have problems with sleep. So so it's always, so we
Yeah.
explore that and then, But that's right, because I just skip over those when I'm doing it, because I already have the answers.
Can anyone speak for the trauma, abuse, neglect, expectation addendum? Does anyone use that?
Yes, I've used them. Oh, yeah, because if they have a history of even like a childhood history of, like I work with adults, so if they've had a sexual abuse when they were younger, I use it.
So it's past and present.
Past and present, yes, and, so they ask for some specifics, and then, if anything was done, like if it was in the past, like what was done in terms of, did they report it or they didn't, that kind of stuff. Well, those are the ones I,
So
How they
as,
felt after.
yeah.
as a clinician, what is something that it can be used as a guide for you that is our absolute, or mandatory?
To report. If, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Guideline is there.
And then if we're the adults.
That replaced the potentially reportable abuse. Right.
What if they say I was in a car accident when I was 8?
No.
Depends
Depends on how they
someone
perceive
died,
it.
and someone died, or how they see it. yeah.
Yes, yes. It can be, if it's not been processed, and it was something
Well,
that was
any
really.
experience
Oh, you're
can
saying-
be, any traumatic experience. I was mugged when I was a young woman, okay? So is that a,
Is that an example, or did that happen to you?
it did happen,
Oh.
it did happen, okay? So, I mean, but no, I'm okay. But I processed it. I processed it, so is it still a trauma? It obviously is, because I still remember it as a
Doesn't affect
traumatic, no, it does not
But
affect me.
that's the
For a
key.
long time it did, I couldn't take this, I was mugged on the subway, and I could not take the subway.
But-
I simply could not take the subway. But I have taken the subway, so obviously the trauma has been processed.
Right.
Do I
But do
give
you
a
see the
weary
world as safe of a
glance?
place as you saw it before that?
No, I don't
So it
see it.
does
I
feel
see
like-
it as something traumatic.
Does it
Wait a
impair
second.
your
I don't have a star.
daily
No.
or
But if I lived in New York City now, it's all environmental because it.
By the bar in New York City.
What?
You better be a little hyper vigilant in New York City.
Well, wait.
Okay, no,
I felt like 25 years ago.
I have a legitimate
40
question.
years ago.
The rest of us are
It's not
All right, and I think that as an illustration. Go ahead.
Okay, Catherine.
But I was under the impression that the addendum was for abuse type trauma, not
No.
any kind of trauma.
No, ma'am.
It's changed.
That's
It
why,
changed.
that's
Oh, it
why,
used to be.
okay, because trauma does impact, and there can be mental health issues. So the sleeplessness may be, it happened at this time of the year. All right, and so all of a sudden, conflict goes up, there may be some other triggers that are, there's so much that can be involved in that. So it's a piece to look at. Again, it's just giving you, and can give you more insight as to what might be happening with the client.
So if you check off the answer to, have there been any events that may have been traumatic? If you select yes, you have to do that addendum.
And does everybody, yes, absolutely. And does everybody understand exploitation?
What, I'm sorry.
Does everybody
Yeah, like
understand what
prostitution,
exploitation?
right? Like prostitute, like if they.
Prostitution, yes. Human trafficking, any of these, yes, okay. So I would just encourage everybody to look over the addendums and really see them as being a useful tool and best practice. I appreciate everybody's excitement.